Lords, ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's my pleasure to offer a very warm welcome. The fan is the other end of the room, unfortunately. I'm pleased to welcome you to our event on religious freedom in the special relationship. My name's Miles Windsor. I'm with the Religious Freedom Institute. I gather there's another event happening this evening at the US Embassy event. So if you've come here, thank you. You've come to the right event. I think there was some kind of, it's another masterstroke in US foreign policy there. Now this venue is quite nostalgic for me. It was in October 2012, pretty much 10 years ago, when I published the Christians in Parliament APPG report into the persecution of Christians in Iran. And that was here, in this beautiful medieval hall. David Burrows, then MP for Enfield, Southgate, chaired that inquiry alongside Baroness Berridge, who went on to establish the APPG for freedom of religion or belief. Fiona Bruce was a sprightly new MP at the time, and she hasn't lost any of her sprightliness either. She took part in the inquiry and attended that launch event here. Now, lots has changed over the last 10 years. In the UK religious freedom policy world. But we can't rest on our laurels. We have to consolidate the progress. It's wonderful that we now have an all-party parliamentary group on freedom of religion or belief. It's wonderful that we have a special envoy for freedom of religion or belief. It's fantastic that we have a Farr forum, but we can't stop here. We need to push forward and better advance religious freedom around the world. As such, having this extraordinary group of dynamic leaders that we have with us tonight, these are some of our great heroes in the religious freedom world that we have with us. And having them here is so important as we seek to have this conversation about how we, as the US, as the United Kingdom, develop our policy, how we move forward. What is the next step in trying to defend the rights of people around the world to believe what they believe, to hold the identity, the religious identity that they hold. And we owe it to the millions who are suffering to keep sharpening ourselves, to keep sharpening our approach, our policies, to keep thinking, coming up with the new ideas about how we move forward. And I'm delighted that to start, we have Raymond Chistey, who's the MP for Gillingham and Raymond, former Special Envoy for Religious Freedom, and he's going to come and speak. And then Ambassador Sam Brownback, former Ambassador at Large for freedom of religion, for religious freedom in the US. These are people who have led, these are heroes who have led the way in this space and who can reflect from their time on what we can be doing to improve our approaches to religious freedom. So please join me in welcoming Raymond Chistey, please.
Well, Miles, can I just say thank you so very much. I think where Miles was correct, there are many heroes on freedom of religion or belief that we have here today that we look up to. And I most certainly do look up to, as a parliamentarian, that when I look across the room today. Lord Alton to my left, who sits there as a parliamentarian, I pay tribute to you for the amazing work that you do, have done, and will continue to do. Thank you. And then I look around to my left. I'm not just keep going to my left. I will come to my right as well. It's the Bishop Philip, who I see on the left. It's the work which I did as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy was to take forward the Truro report, the 22 specific recommendations with regards to enhancing freedom of religion or belief around the world. To you, Bishop Philip, I'm forever grateful because as the envoy, it was so important to have structure in terms of what you're delivering with regards to advancing freedom of religion or belief. And your report was absolutely superb in regards that across the board, some of which I will touch on in due course. And I know when we worked together, we took forward 17 of those different recommendations, but your report was superb. To you and your team, Charles Hall, thank you for what you did and you continue to do. To my right, I have Father Michael Nazir-Ali, who I know since I was 16 when he came to my school in the Medway Towns, and don't ask him what I was like when I was a student. He was the Bishop of Rochester at the time, and his commitment to advancing freedom of religion or belief is on record, and I was a pleasure to have him on my advisory board when I was the Special Envoy for freedom of religion or belief, along with Sir Mark Grant, our former ambassador to the UN, Michael Evans and Msgr, because as the envoy, you make strategic decisions, but the best decisions are when you have good people around you advising you on how you can get things done. So I'm forever grateful to the team at the Foreign Office when I was the envoy on that. Today's topic is with regards to the United Kingdom and the United States advancing freedom of religion or belief around the world. How do we do it? Bilaterally, you are limited in terms of what you can do. You have to work with like-minded partners around the world to be able to make that difference. Whether it's through the United Nations is one aspect, whether it's through the Human Rights Council is another aspect, whether it's working with civil society is another. But how do you then bring about real change? I think for that, I'm forever grateful to the man sitting on the left, although he would say he's on center-right of American politics. It's Sam Brownback, the brilliant former ambassador at the United States State Department. So for you, I'm forever grateful, and I'll touch on some of the work that we did and how we were able to bring about some change. There's a lot more work to do, but there were some real improvements with regards to the work that we were doing. And you were brilliantly aided by the man at the back, Knox Thames, who was forever on the phone. So one of the things where Sam, you and Knox and the team pushed hard and got the United Kingdom to come on board early on was with regards to setting up the alliance of like-minded countries, to advance religious freedom. And then you look at the like-minded partners, what do we do? Were we able to bring about change? And the answer to that is, if you are then looking at what happened post-COVID with the release of religious prisoners, members of the Baha'i community in Yemen, they were released. And do you know why? I know for a certainty that the work that we did made a difference. Because after I'd stepped down as the envoy for freedom of religion or belief, I had a letter on my desk in my constituency. And the letter was from the local Baha'i community in Raynham. And they said, "Dear Mr. Chisti, we just want to say thank you so very much for the work that you did with the release of members of the Baha'i community, because they were our relatives. And we just want to say thank you. So the next thing you do with your staffer, does the letter have a phone number? Yes. Let's call the family." So you then pick the call up, say thank you for your kind note. But we're pleased to be able to have made that difference, working with Francis Sam, what you and I and Knox and fellow members of the Alliance did. That tangible difference, I saw it in my district after I'd stepped down from office. And there's many other cases like that where we may have not heard, but that difference was made. In Uzbekistan, we had the release of over 1,400 prisoners of religious belief or conscience. In Eritrea, there was a real difference on that, made to a release of religious prisoners. So working with like-minded partners, the work that you do behind channels, through diplomatic channels, and the statements that you make to push people in the right direction to make the right call. That was one. The second was with regards to the application of the Magnitsky sanctions, holding perpetrators to account. If you do them by yourself, yes, you can make a difference. But if you can do them with like-minded partners around the world, you can make a greater difference. So the sanctions that we applied with regards to the situation in Myanmar, that was right call. The situation we did with regards to the situation in China with the Uyghurs, that was the right call. Where the United States are ahead of us, and the United Kingdom needs to follow suit, is with regards to the situation in the determination of genocide. In Myanmar, the United States have made the call. The United Kingdom have so far not. That's where we need to come together to do that. The other one where the United Kingdom have not yet, but the United States has, Miles mentioned his first interaction with regards to Iran. Iran has a real issue with regards to persecution of the Baha'i and other religious minorities. The United States have imposed sanctions. The United Kingdom have not yet with regards to certain individuals. So work on that can most certainly be coordinated as we move forward to look at how we can bring about that further change. The other one which I want to say where real progress can be made and was made, Sudan. United States, Canada, and it's a real pleasure to catch up with the Foreign Minister from Canada earlier, Rob Oliphant. It was United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, the Holy See, and the Church of England working together to bring about the change in Sudan. The laws on conversion laws, the issue of the death penalty, and we need to make sure that that work now continues as we move forward in those difficult, challenging circumstances. As we move forward, what more do we need to do? And I think on that, I just want to pay a tribute to the work of Knox Thames in his recent article where he says there's 4 C's: consistency, coalitions, call-outs, and consequences. As we move forward post the conference here, what tangible things can we do to make that difference? So the United Kingdom, the United States have worked together, creation of the alliance, tangible differences on the sanctions, the call-outs during COVID-19. I remember speaking to fellow envoys during COVID. The challenges that we saw with the persecution of individuals during COVID for their faith or belief, misinformation, disinformation, and then the issue of aid, how do you address that? So I think what would be good post this conference is to see how do we best address the situation with regards to minorities post-COVID as we move on. So those are, for me, some of the areas that we have made a real difference, where we can make further difference with regards to challenges in different parts of the world. We see the situation in Russia. It was absolutely right and proper that these sanctions were applied to Archbishop Kirill. But the other question that we have, and what was landed on my desk, the persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. The United States have imposed sanctions on those individuals who are linked to that persecution. The United Kingdom have not so far. We need to make sure that we continue to work with our like-minded countries, partners, to advance that. Time is of the essence, and I was taught as a young lawyer, brevity is a virtue, not a vice, so keep it short. So as I wrap up my remarks, I just want to say a big thank you to RFI, to Tom, to Eric, to the team. Thank you for all the amazing work that you do. I saw it as the envoy. I see it as a senior fellow working with all of you, the amazing work that you could do. Because I say this, governments alone cannot do all that needs to be done to advance freedom of religion or belief. It has to be governments, it has to be civil society, it has to be NGOs, all coming together to help bring about that change. And I see Nadine Maenza to my left. Nadine, when you were chair of the USERF, you had a tangible, action-led approach. So thank you to all that you do. So everyone in this room, thank you, because you are here as stakeholders with regards to showing a real interest. Because when I was at the Foreign Office, the question I asked, what are the key issues that are written to the Foreign Office with regards to priority of the number of correspondences? And they said, first is the Middle East peace process. Second is freedom of religion or belief, which shows significant interest by parliamentarians. And that comes through civil society making representations to their members of parliament, who then are able to work with the likes of Jeremy Hunt, who was the former Secretary of State who initiated the Truro report. So thank you to all of you. And I have the real pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Ambassador Sam Brownback. Sam, thank you. And over to you.
Raymond, thank you. He's been such a great ally and friend to work with. And I'm waiting for our 2 football teams to play each other. You gave me a jersey. Wait, no, but I can't remember the team. What's your team? What's that? Okay, Chittingham. No, don't do that. But I mean, my team's the Kansas City Chiefs, and I'm waiting for us to play. I think this would really be interesting. But it'd have to be some mixture of your football and our football, and it might sell pretty well, actually, if you would do that. We've got a really good quarterback. I don't know how he can kick the ball. And then they point out to me, said, how do you use your hands in playing football? What's the deal here? Which I'd never thought of it until you questioned me like that. How do you call it football and you use your hands? And I thought, what's that? I don't know. Anyway, I love my Chiefs, and we've had some good conversations about it. Raymond's been great on this. I wanted to pay tribute. I can't recognize everybody in this room I ought to pay tribute to. Knox Thames has been recognized, but Knox had the original ideas for the ministerial that we started out in 2018, and I'm just really grateful because that has blossomed into kind of this gathering or gatherings of this that I think has been fantastic. Tom Farr has been about this business for many years. He's in his third or fifth career now, heading up our. How many careers have you had? Do you think, Tom? But he keeps getting it done, and that's the beautiful thing about it. And then Lord David Alton, which has been a dear friend, and as I consider one of the really fathers of the patriarchs of the field. He was doing it before it was cool, I'm a great admirer. I want to tell you one story because I think it's kind of funny relative to how how the field is developed. My first trip to Central Asia, I was a junior senator. I was 1997 or 1998, and I'm traveling to Uzbekistan, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm Kansas senator. I don't know anything about foreign policy, but I love it. I'm very interested in it. And so I get on the Foreign Relations Committee as a third pick, which is highly unusual in the United States Senate, and it's considered a AAA committee. So this is the top committee in the U.S. Senate, and I'm picking it as a freshman senator in the third round. Well, that's because you can only serve on 2 AAA committees, and nobody else wants foreign relations because it's not a place you can raise money from, and it's generally a place you get in trouble in. So give it to the junior guy from Kansas. He's fine. And Jesse Helms is chair of the committee, and I'm as far away from the chairman as you can get and still be on the committee and in the room. But Jesse liked me, and he was older and didn't have the young legs, and I had the young legs and no good sense. So he would hand a lot of things to me, and I would gladly run with it and not know if I was going to get shot or killed or whatever. He's a junior senator from Kansas, and that's okay. They're dispensable to do that. Well, I go to Uzbekistan, Central Asia, start to develop some policy recommendations for Central Asia. This is 1997. They've split off from the Soviet Union. They're tottering. Central Asia is between, are we going to go into the Islamic sphere and be kind of more of a radicalized Islamic country, or are we going to just keep being pulled back into the Russian sphere? And so you got another iteration of the great game kind of being played out at this time. And as you recall, when the Soviet Union split up and all the nations, I think 19 countries came out of the split up of the Soviet Union, all the people in the Politburo just went to their home areas and set up shop and took over. It was all these Politburo members that were running these Central Asian countries. And so there's Prime Minister Karimov is running Uzbekistan. And he's a tough guy. I don't know, did any of you deal with Karimov? Did you ever deal with him, Tom, David? This dude's, he's a tough dude. But he wants to deal with the United States, and he wants money coming from the West, and he wants all this, and he's a former Politburo member. And my aide, to make the story a little more colorful, is a former CIA person whose dad ran the CIA in Europe during the Brezhnev era. So she's second generation CIA. She's tracked all these Politburo members for years, and she's wanted to get, piano wire and slit their throats for years, and she's there with me, and instead getting kisses from Politburo members. And she said, I got 4 kisses from different Politburo members, and she's kind of marking that on her belt. But so I'm raising religious freedom issues up with President Karimov at the time. And I asked him at that time, I said, there's this man that's in prison, and he was a Christian minister that was being held in an Uzbek prison. And I'm saying to him, said, I think this guy's being unfairly charged, and I think you ought to release him. And he just kind of, the interpreter says his thing, and he kind of gruffly, what? Oh, what? He just kind of asked, and then he asked a few questions, and he goes, sure. It was just kind of like, flippant, done. And what I asked then afterwards, my interpreter said, what was the conversation he's had? And he said, well, we were telling him that he is a Christian that's in jail here, and Karimov was concerned that it was some of the Islamic organizers that were in jail that I asked to get out, and he was going to keep them locked down, but if it's a Christian, whatever. It didn't matter to him. And it just struck me, a couple of things. Number one, just the petulance at the time of just really locking somebody up for their faith, just whatever, which isn't there as much now. If you're going to do that and you're a foreign leader now, you're kind of looking at it going, okay, I've got a score here, and this is going to cost me something if I do that. Secondly, the importance of cross-faith advocacy for that. If I'm a Christian and advocating for Muslims to get out from another country, it's got a great salience to it. It really cuts across the grain, and it's very helpful. And that's why these movements are so important. And it's taken me a while to get my head around this because I'm a follower of Jesus. My faith's very important to me. Raymond's faith is very important to him, and to most of you, your faith is very important. So I want to get Christians out of jail. That's my heart. It really is. But then the more I've gotten into this, the more I've recognized that it's still very important to do these others, and it may be actually more powerful. And when we go after the Uyghurs, when Christians in the United States go after getting the Uyghurs out of jail, it actually has a higher saliency and a higher power. And on top of that, it helps the Christians in China. Because if I can get Uyghurs out of the jail, it makes them have to wrestle with this issue of religious persecution. And hopefully it gets other people of other faiths advocating and pulling for my own. It's actually more powerful. So Mike Pompeo starts pushing on the Uyghur issue and determines this is a genocide. And it's the natural response if he was advocating for the Christians to get them out of jail in China, and there's plenty of them in jail, is, well, yeah, of course you're doing that. That's your own tribe. But when it's the Uyghurs, it's like their counterpunch is, I can't use that one. He's just not advocating for Christians. But in the end of the day, it actually makes the situation far better for Christians. If we get a better situation for the Uyghur that are dominantly Muslims. And I've just seen this play a number of different times, and I think as we grow in ability and sophistication, I think we've got to deploy that more and more and more. And I think we got to start grabbing the money more often, grabbing aid dollars, grabbing trade dollars, going at these other countries as a way that we can grow and mature. And then finally, and I talked longer than I intended to, and the room is hotter than I thought it would be, on such lovely weather that we've had, but maybe it's the Boris Johnson effect that's happening right now here. Everything's blamed on the guy that's in trouble, Although, Ray, are you up for the PM? Are you? I don't want to get you in trouble here. One thing I think we really need to do a lot of, and we don't do enough of, is really to celebrate. This movement's made extraordinary gains. A lot of you have been around it for some period of time, and a career in some cases. And we've seen this kind of slowly develop for the first 10, 20 years, I would say, Tom, David, and others. It was a pretty long slog, and there weren't very many people interested, to where now we're on that hockey stick where we're really going up the scale, and now there's a lot of people, and they're seeing the saliency of it. We're starting to get mainstreamed in the foreign policy community. We're having more people recognize genocides tied to religious minority persecution in most cases. We're getting there, and this is really a good time to celebrate that, not to quit. Nobody's going to quit. But we never celebrate our victories enough. This is really extraordinary. the growth of this movement at this point in time. Anybody that's been around it for any period of time looks at it and goes, this is fantastic. We did a couple ministerials. Now it's jumped over the pond. It's got Europeans just did a fantastic job. Fiona Bruce and Tariq did just, Lord Achman did a fabulous job of this. The government did. And I think it's really a good point, and this is a good time for us to celebrate, honestly, and to, just to cheer, really, because those people, we did get 2,000 people out of jail plus during the COVID crisis. And before, when we'd get one out of jail, if we got 5 out in a year's period of time, we would celebrate 5. Well, we got 2,000 out. We're moving. And it's time to celebrate, and God bless you for doing it. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Eric Patterson. I serve as Executive Vice President of the Religious Freedom Institute. I'm delighted that you're all here with us tonight. At RFI, our mission is to advance religious freedom as a fundamental human right, as a source of individual and societal flourishing, as the cornerstone of a successful society, and as a driver of national and international security. And we've provided right behind you tonight an entire suite of resources, many of which were funded by the John Templeton Foundation or the Templeton Religious Trust, country-level landscape reports on religious freedom, some other reports that are based on our Freedom of Religious Institutions and Society project that finished in December, talking about not just the religious freedom of individuals, but the religious freedom of institutions, faith-based nonprofits, houses of worship, and the like. I hope you'll take some of those with you so that we don't have to take them back to America on Friday. Seriously, it's a delight to have you all here with us. And this part of our program tonight, we're going to hear from some of the experts and then give you a chance to ask some questions of them. Let me briefly introduce them. And Monsignor Michael, if you join the group over here, we'd love that. And we're going to just kind of go right down the aisle, but I'm going to introduce all of our speakers, and then each of them will speak for a few minutes and literally just go bam, 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 bam. So let me introduce them to you and also to our digital audience. First, on my left, right here, no stranger, a great champion of religious freedom, Lord David Alton, a man who's had a distinguished career as a teacher, and then as city councilor, and then a member of parliament for 18 years, and now a life peer. Thank you for being with us tonight. Next to him, Nadine Maenza, who just came off of 2 terms with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, where she finished a term as chair of that institution, and now the new president, I'm blanking out, of the IRF Secretariat, the International Religious Freedom Secretariat. Welcome, Nadine. Bishop Philip Mounstephen, who has been in parish ministry, worked in foreign missions, was a leader in missions, and of course, as bishop, very importantly, led what we call the Truro Report on Persecuted Christians. We're delighted to have you with us here tonight. Tom Farr was the founding director of the Office of International Religious Freedom at the U.S. Department of State. He's been a great champion of religious freedom for a quarter of a century. My boss, a former diplomat and U.S. Army officer, Tom Farr. And finally, again, a great champion from right here, the president of OXTRAD, Msgr. Michael Nazir-Ali. Welcome. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to our first speaker, Lord Alton. We'll just go from your left to right, and then I'll moderate some time of Q&A before we go back to refreshments at the end. Lord Alton.
Well, thank you. Picking up on the themes that we've heard already, first of all, Sam said that I've been involved in this before it was cool. Well, it's certainly not cool tonight, that's for sure. But he also was reminding me gently just how much water has gone under the bridge. 1979 was when I was elected as the youngest member of the House of Commons, but just a few weeks before that, 7 Siberian Christians arrived at the American embassy in Moscow, and they wanted exit visas. They wanted to leave the Soviet Union. But before they could be processed, the Soviet Secret Service turned up, the KGB turned up, and they were going to arrest them. So someone from the embassy went out and took them in. And they stayed there from 1978 until 1983. Now, in the basement. So if you feel that it's getting hot in here, imagine, mind you, it would normally be cold there, I suspect. But it's extraordinary stories. 7 Pentecostals who wanted to get out for reasons of religious freedom. And a young guy came in, he was a Baptist, he wanted to find a member of the House of Commons who might be interested in taking up this case. And he couldn't find anybody, and he ended up therefore talking to me. And I think that was a bit of a disappointment in some ways, that a friendship was made, a guy called Danny Smith. And Danny and I took up that case, and more to the point, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and many others took up that case, and eventually they were released. But it was a bit like the boy in Greek mythology that plays the lute to make the sun come up. It might have come up anyway. There was a lot of coverage about it at the time. And inevitably, I then got inundated with letters from people saying, but what about this case, that case, or the other case? So Danny and I decided to set up the Jubilee campaign in Parliament. We wrote to members of the House of Commons. I got Margaret Thatcher and the leaders of the 3 opposition parties to be patrons of what we were trying to do. And we immediately got responses from people saying, yeah, we'd be prepared to take up a case. Let us have the details. So without having to pay any salaries, without having to recruit anybody, we had an army of people called members of Parliament, members of the House of Commons, from right across the political divide. And out of Jubilee's work in Parliament, I learned a lot more about the depredations in the former Soviet Union. It's no coincidence that we didn't discuss what we'd be wearing tonight, but look at Sam's shirt, look at his tie, and of course whose colours are blue and yellow. The reason why this matters to me so much is that during that time with Jubilee campaign, I went out to Ukraine. It was 1988. And as I mentioned in the discussion yesterday morning, the media weren't being allowed in because of all the demonstrations, but we took a sort of backdoor route. The 3 of us went in via Poland, we went to Krakow, we got a car, we hired it, we went down to Przemyśl, we got on a train to Msgr, the border with the Soviet Union, and as the train left, 3 of us were on the platform with the KGB, and they kept us overnight. They opened our bags. There were 38 Ukrainian prayer books. There was a ITN camera that we'd been entrusted with to see if we could get any footage, and there were various other things as well. The extraordinary thing was that eventually when they said that we would be allowed in, 5 o'clock in the morning after body searches and the rest, they packed back the prayer books, they packed back the camera, they confiscated my copy of the Liverpool Echo, which I happened to be with me. Paul will be particularly amused by this because, of course, he's a subversive from Liverpool too. And they have a football club, by the way, and don't take them on, Sam, because Kansas will be in real trouble. Gillingham's a different matter altogether, I might add. An old babushka was sweeping up around us, watching what was going on. And when the KGB people had gone, she came over to me and held some rubles and pointed at our bags. We opened the bags and she took out one of the prayer books and asked could she have it. It was an extraordinary moment. And the next day we met, I mentioned it yesterday, a bishop, Pavlo Vasilik. We met the chairman for the Committee of the Defense of the Greek Catholic Church, Ivan Gell, and a young priest who'd been sent to Chernobyl to clear radioactive waste as a punishment. The bishop and the layman had spent 17 and 18 years in prison. This had an extraordinary effect on me, like the case of Alexander Ogorodnikov, like the Siberian 7, like many others that we heard during that period. And it led to Jubilee campaign being imitated in America, because a young woman called Amber Walder came to London. She was a trainee lawyer, liked what we were doing, and needless to say, having gone back to the US and decided to do something similar in Washington, completely outgrew the parent in London. And that was a wonderful thing to see. And to this day, at the summit last week, Anne was there, Jubilee was there, they organised a meeting here yesterday on the blasphemy laws. And these things, therefore, they're civil society, call it whatever you want, but these are NGOs, these are ordinary people committed, wanting to do something. But it comes out of personal experiences. And when I travelled to Vietnam, to Laos, into Burma with Congressman Joe Pitts, when he was in the House, we did that together. We did a report, joint report for Jubilee together. When I went to Nepal, it was, again, with young staffers mainly from Congress. We met a nun who had been marched naked through a town where she'd been pelted. We met a man who'd been beaten with batons. Someone else had been put in the stocks. You take your faith rather more seriously when you've met people who've suffered for theirs. And so whatever the ideology, and after 1989, of course, we turned our attention to the Middle East, to the Far East, which has led to taking up campaigns about the Uyghurs, about the Rohingya, the Yazidis. We've done meetings on all of those issues in the last 24 hours. The Ahmadis, my friend Wael Eleghi is here. Dr. Eleghi and I went together with CSW to northern Iraq in 2019. We met the Baba Sheikh from the Yazidis. We met the Assyrians. We went to Simele, which is where the genocide against Assyrians took place in 1933. We saw still fragments of bones in what is now a rubbish tip. Appalling that this is not commemorated or remembered. But one man who did study it was a young Jewish lawyer called Raphael Lemkin. He studied it, and he looked at the atrocities committed also against the Armenians. 1.3 million, at least, Armenians had died in 1915. And it was the beginning of the slow burn genocide that has continued across the Middle East since that very day. Adolf Hitler famously would go on to say, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" And impunity is something that we must always counter. Because if you can think you can get away with those things, I document it in a little book that Dr. Ewelina Rochab and I have just written on state responses to crimes of genocide. It's a sort of primer. And we document what was said in 1915. We documented what Raphael Lemkin saw when he studied Simele. And of course, he would then lose more than 40 of his own family in the Holocaust. So just as the Jewish families that I visited in the former Soviet Union deeply influenced me, and actually one family whom I campaigned for, the Schlepaks, very famous dissident family in their day, the first place they chose to come to before going to Israel was Liverpool on their way out, because they knew that people, the 35, a group of 35 Liverpool women and Christians in Liverpool would campaign for them throughout that time. So standing together, whether it's across the pond, as we were told earlier on by Sam, whether it's with your friends, whether it's through fellow colleagues, left, right, and centre. Right and left is less important than right and wrong. You know where you stand on these issues. They're very clear-cut. Working with Philip has been a real blessing. And I join with others, with Ray, and I admire so much what Ray did during his time as Special Envoy. Fiona and I go back way beyond when she first came into the House of Commons. And we're very, very good friends. But we've been so blessed in our Special Envoys. We've been so blessed by Jeremy Hunt and the commissioning also of the Truro report, which has made a big difference. It's about providing evidence and facts. The arguments have got to be credible, because if you're going to use them in Parliament, if you're going to use them in Congress, they've got to stand up. Now, sometimes the British and the Americans are accused of being divided by a common language. And maybe even the acronyms we use aren't the same, whether it's Earth. I thought it was an environmental summit when I heard it was the Earth Summit. And I had to have it spelled out to me as IRF. And Forb sounds as though you swallowed something nasty. This is Article 18. And this was a joint effort of both the Americans and the British. Eleanor Roosevelt and her committee came up with a Declaration on Human Rights. Raphael Lemkin, having heard Winston Churchill say this is a crime so vast, so awful, it doesn't have a name, came up with the word genocide. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention came together in 1948. And they were the work of people from Europe and America together. And I think we should never lose sight of that. Article 18 is sometimes described as an orphaned right, the forgotten right. It should not be, because everything else, all the other rights, weave into it. And if you only have to look at the emerging signs of genocide to see where they begin. They begin, first of all, with rank discrimination. It moves on to persecution, sometimes to crimes against humanity, and ultimately to the crime above all crimes, to genocide. And we must stand together in now renewing both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also renewing the Genocide Convention, so that it starts to bring to account the people who have been responsible for these appalling depredations. I've spoken too much, too long. I've just been passed a note, and I'm going to pass on the microphone and the baton to you.
Well, I wouldn't have passed him that note, so you know. We really appreciate it. It's an honor to be up here with these fine heroes of mine, and you know, to be here. And thank you to RFI. You know, they really are the scholarship that you have is become so important to those of us in the Earth world or the Forb world. And I'll tell you what's exciting is when you see, you know, a Biden appointee using an RFI document to meet with the head of state. You know, when you're seeing things happen because of the work of our communities, which I've been able to see in recent months, and it's just really encouraging. So I just wanted to quickly give some of my takeaways and talking with all of you and just listening this week and meeting so many folks doing the important work on the ground is really, you know, first of all, the UK folks, as you know, are, you know, I feel like my squad. In fact, I think I work closer. The people I work the closest with are based in the UK. So to be honest, I always feel like I did work here first and then kind of started doing more in Washington. And so I just appreciate the fact it's about getting it done. And that's really, you know, I think we have this really sweet opportunity to collaborate and to coordinate. And I just want to say that, like, I think our focus, you know, we didn't have a lot of wins in the last 12 months. I mean, USRF had some years of really positive reports, and the last report we had was there's only 4 countries that had tiny improvements. You know, I think because of that, I think there's a lot of low fruit that we should be coordinating for, that, you know, you can look at USRF recommendations for some of them. You know, things that we could do is coordinate between the UK, between the US government, between civil society, between friends like Sam, who's friends with leaders, and really, you know, be strategic about it and get some wins on the board for them and for us. And the other thing in terms of how we approach this is I think the other super important thing to move the ball forward in the religious freedom conditions changing on the ground is to empower the reformers in these countries. And I think all of us have a lot of relationships. I tweeted last year, without thinking, a tweet that USRF had presented to me to tweet about a country, and it was an ambassador that I'd worked with. And I didn't think about it. And then, you know, and it was true, and we tweeted it, and he called up and explained to me how harmful that was. And it wasn't USRF should always call out, because they have a different mandate. So I'm never going to say USRF don't do that. But the fact of the matter is, because this person had been advocating so hard, he had to go apologize and explain why the people he fought to have a seat at the table are now making him look bad. Like, we need to empower those people. And I think most of the time it's private. Like, you guys are friends with a lot of these people, and what can we do, and be strategic. What can we do to help this person to have that seat at the table, and make sure what we're doing, we're not getting attaboys back home, but it's actually frying him when he goes to the Capitol and tries to fight for this. So that's the other thing that I think is super important. You know, I think we've talked a lot about the importance of civil society. You know, and it's interesting, part of the reason me joining the Earth Secretariat was, you know, the first couple of years on USRF, the government stuff was just so exciting, and it still is, the government meetings, but then you start seeing that where we're, and that's the other part of it is learning from where we're having wins. It's like, how, if there's so few improvements in the last year, where are they and how'd they happen? And you always see civil society on the ground. And top down, to be honest, it's both. And obviously, I always say it's not like apples and oranges. I feel like every country's a different fruit. You know, it's not that easy. It's not like everyone has the same exact way to do it. But the point is, let's look at learn from where we've had some successes and empower civil society, you know, and coordinate with them. I mean, when we're doing these empowering, when we're doing a low fruit hit, and we also have civil society doing something, like, let's be really strategic and really smart about how we approach the next year, because I think we have a real good opportunity, and clearly the people in this room, you know, are the players, the ones that are going to do that, and a lot of the civil society people on the ground that are looking for partners, and it could be us. So I'm looking forward to a really successful year, and thanks again for letting me be a part of this amazing group.
I think the first thing I want to say is, particularly to friends from across the pond, welcome to the cultural heritage experience of life in a medieval dungeon. I hope you enjoy it. Although I have to say, of course, I don't think they serve canapes in a medieval dungeon. It is rather hot in here. When I was asked by Jeremy Hunt to lead the review on how the Foreign and Commonwealth Office had responded to the issue of the global issue of the persecution of Christians, the first thing I want to say is, as a Christian leader, I want to say thanks be to God, because I was so aware of what you might call a following wind of the Holy Spirit that was enabling us in the work that we did. And one of the great gifts were two people who were actually in Cornwall, where I live, who have significant experience in this area, and someone else who some of you know, the quite remarkable Charles Farr, Sir Charles Farr, Baronet. And Charles is a remarkable man. And one of the things that Charles did very early on was to say to me, you need to come to the States. Before we kick this thing off, you need to come to the States. You need to see what they're doing in the States. And so I did. And I was also at the Ministerial in 2019. And I have to say, one of the personal pleasures of the last few days has been meeting people, again, in person, who we met then and we've connected with over the years. And that has been a treat. And I want to say that, it was impossible to kind of copy and paste, as it were, the American approach to freedom, international religious freedom, FORB, into the UK context. But it was inspirational. And we learned a huge amount from what you've done in the States. And we sought, as it were, to sort of culturally transpose some of that, certainly, into the UK context. Just to give you one little example of that. So we authored the report, we published it. To my great surprise, the government as a whole accepted it as policy, not just the Foreign Office, but the government as a whole. And I had no expectation of that. One of our recommendations was that the post of Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief should be established in perpetuity. And someone said to me I suppose a couple of months later, they said, did you know that the Prime Minister's appointed a Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion and Belief, Ray Chisty MP? I said, no, that's a really good idea. And they said to me, you do know that was one of your recommendations, didn't you? Anyway, so it's a delight to be here again with Ray Chisty, and I do honour him as well as Fiona Bruce for the work that they've done. So I do want to say that the American model was inspiration, has been, continues to be, inspirational for us. The establishment of the post of Ambassador at Large, the presence of USURF, the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, all those things have been things that have been inspirational for us. I think what I take from all of this are two things, two lessons for us globally, actually. One is, I absolutely believe we need to hardwire freedom of religion or belief, international religious freedom, into the way that we do business. We need to hardwire it. If I'm honest with you, tonight I feel a bit nervous because we are in a time of intense political fragility in this country. And I think it will be a disaster if we lost the focus that we have put on freedom of religion or belief in the last few years, as a result of political turmoil in this country that I imagine is going on tonight. So I have a really strong personal conviction we need to hardwire freedom of religion or belief into the way that we do business. I think one of the lessons we can learn in this country is we must have a bipartisan approach to this. This must not be seen as the possession of the right. We have to have a bipartisan approach to this. This is about human flourishing in its depth and in its breadth. And if we ignore it, then we are failing huge numbers of people on this planet. So it must not be the preserve of one part of the political spectrum. I could go on about that, but I won't. But I'll give you one example of hardwiring it. And again, huge credit to Charles Farr for this. Recommendation 22 of my review was that the implementation of the review should be independently reviewed after 3 years. Now, that review was conducted by a number of really high-level academics, and they have produced what I think is a really good, objective, dispassionate report. They finished it on the 15th of April It was only published on Monday. You might want to ask why there was such a time lag. I couldn't possibly answer. But there was. But the other thing that really pleased me was that just this last Monday, the day of publication, it was accompanied by a ministerial statement from the Foreign Secretary, who not only welcomed but accepted their verdict, which was that good progress had been made with the recommendations, but they were not complete. They were not implemented in full, and we need to push ahead with it. So I think that's a very practical example of hardwiring a commitment to FORB, so that actually the UK government has to press ahead with it in the future. The other thing I'd say very briefly is, hardwiring it is not enough. This is actually also about the exercise of soft power. And I think one of the things that I take away from these last few days is that we have a real sense of a freedom of religion or belief, an international religious freedom. Let's make sure the language is interchangeable. We have a real sense of community around this, and that is really important. I want to say that the last few days for me have been fantastic because I know that I've been among friends. And this sense of connecting on a deep level around this issue, I think is something that we should not undervalue. There is immense kind of relational capital in all of this. We are building a global movement that has significant momentum. So let's not lose that. Let's capitalize upon it, see it roll forward, see it roll out from the UK and the USA and through the alliance and on into other countries as well. And I'm delighted by the progress that's been made, but let's not fool ourselves. This is an issue and a challenge that is getting greater in the world today, not less. So we must continue our commitment to it. Thanks very much.
Well, I'm older than anybody else on this panel, I think. But they're all my heroes, too. So you can have heroes that are younger than you, which you'll be glad to know when you get to be my age. I want to focus on the Transatlantic Partnership part of this discussion. What can we do together? What advice can we give each other? I think we've already heard a little advice for the Americans. And for example, Miles, who opened us, we were together over the weekend for a statesmanship and religious freedom seminar with undergraduate and graduate students, some of whom are with us tonight. And I said to Miles, it was July the 4th, I said, what would you do to further the Transatlantic Partnership? And he made reference to an controversial American politician whose saying is, make America great again. And Miles said, we should do some red hats for the ministerial that said, make America great Britain again. So I told him, this is the only litmus test for working at the RFI. You've got to have a sense of humor like that. Transatlantic partnership is important to me. My dad was stationed here in the Second World War. I'm going to make a trip, as I always do here in London, over to a little chapel off of Grosvenor Square where I know he worshipped when he was here. Very early, he introduced me to some friends he made during the war, and they were friends of mine for many years. They're all gone now, but this means a lot to me. And then in graduate school, I happened to be fortunate enough to focus on Great Britain. And I wrote a master's thesis and a dissertation, you may be surprised to learn, on the Labour Party. Sorry, David. This is a country where there is truly a special relationship. And for me, it's not only a special relationship, it's a personal relationship. So everything I say tonight is out of love, whether it sounds like it or not. What I'd like to do is make a few recommendations. And I want to begin by, I was listening to some of the stories that people have told. I want to begin with a story of a Catholic priest I met in China who was a very brave man, and we met surreptitiously. And he said, this was 20 years ago, and he said to me, if I speak publicly about the Catholic understanding of life, the sacredness of life from conception to natural death, I fear that I will be punished severely. And if in the confessional someone confesses to me about this, I have to be very careful, because if I am a Catholic priest, as I am, but if this is not a Catholic parishioner or true Catholic, I'm in deep trouble. But he said to me, I will be a Catholic priest, no matter what happens to him. And I don't know whatever happened to that man. Alas, I could not be in touch with him. But I've never forgotten that, particularly these days, given the wars in the West over life and the sacredness of life, and the attacks in my own country on Catholic churches and sacred sites simply because they defend that. I want you to know how important this is to me, this kind of suffering overseas, and how it's molded my own approach to this. So let me make a series of a couple of recommendations. Most of them are for both us of our side on this special relationship. One is, and it's been said here many, many times, focus on religious minorities. Focus on this religious minority and the others of his co-victims today in China, in this atheist totalitarian country that is brutalizing Muslims, has been for years brutalizing Tibetan Buddhists, murders Falun Gong practitioners and harvests their organs, and is sinicizing the Roman Catholic Church and Protestant churches, which simply means making them an arm of the Communist Party and the Communist State. Why are they doing this? Because people who have an authority greater than the state are a threat to totalitarians. And we must stand for them and we must fight for them. Now, allied to this, I think it is a mistake to move away in this movement from religion. Religious freedom is important because people must be free to be religious. So if you want to defend atheists, which you must, because they are human beings with a worldview, don't pretend that atheism is a religion. It isn't. It is confusing and distorting, especially to those on the other end, the Chinese and anyone else. Defend religious freedom, and you will defend atheists. And I would say the same thing with our LGBT brothers and sisters. You want to defend them, don't pretend that's a religion. It isn't. They are human beings who will be defended by the defense of religious freedom. Recommendation number one. Number two, zooming down to the bottom. I'm a former Foreign Service officer. I really believe that at the consulate and embassy level, British and American embassies should be collaborating. I'm sure they are episodically, but they should be doing so, if necessary, by instruction from the top. But we should be encouraging them to make joint demarches to the government, to the most senior officials they can go with our ambassadors if possible, or our consul generals. We should be urging them to go together to the imam, to the religious leaders, and say, we want you to defend religious freedom for yourselves and everybody else in this society. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, go together to the victims, to those who are being persecuted, and say, we together are with you. This transatlantic partnership, these two great democracies. And I just have to say, I love this country, second only to my own. And I want everyone to understand the relationship between them. And for those who hear that from our betters in the Foreign Service and the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, if I can put it that way, that's what I was taught as a Foreign Service officer to say. My betters here, when they go together, they will be more effective. Over the longer term, make religious freedom career enhancing for Foreign Service, for diplomats. How do you do that? Make it a specialty within an official specialty. I made this recommendation 20 years ago in the Foreign Service. It's not yet a bestseller because we have these branches, we have political branches. Have a political specialty for religious freedom. Economic branch, have a, did you not know that religious freedom can help economic development? Have economic officers understand religious freedom. Religious literacy, another recommendation. Here I think I am beginning to hit on some of Bishop Phillips' Truro recommendations. Make training of all diplomats necessary, but also make it mandatory. That will make it necessary. We began in the United States with voluntary training for diplomats. And you know who showed up? Not many. I mean, old guys that are about to retire and they're looking for something to do. Religious people who happen to be between assignments. But today, over the course of 22 years, thanks a lot to a guy standing in the back of the room, Judd Birdsall, who is now at the Berkeley Center at Georgetown, but at the time was in the Policy Planning Office of the State Department. We now have a requirement to teach Foreign Service officers about religious freedom. And that, along with my next and final recommendation, the annual report, which we started from day one, which is 1999, and I believe was another recommendation of the Truro report, has revolutionized, well, that's probably too strong a word, has made a major difference for Foreign Service officers. So 1999, that's what, 23 years. Junior Foreign Service officers were given the job of writing this report. What does that mean? I got to go see the imam, the priest, the Jewish rabbi, and every other religious minority in this country that I'm in, because if I don't, I will not write a good report back to the State Department, and that's going to hurt my career. Now we have 23 years of American Foreign Service officers having to do this. They've moved up into the ranks. They're having an impact on what we're doing. I highly recommend this to our British friends. And along with that, to make the position of special envoy to the Prime Minister statutory, and to make the position within the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office statutory and make it grow. It needs to be larger, and it will begin to have a major transformative effect on the way that British diplomats join with their American cousins in promoting religious freedom around the world. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric. I mean, so much has been said of such value that it's difficult to know what else there remains to be said. But just one or two comments about program. I think Tom has said something about that, about the future, and one or two observations. So I think the first thing, it should be obvious, I suppose, is the presumption of freedom. That we must begin with the presumption of freedom of religion and of belief. Even at this conference, I have heard proposals about limiting such freedom for one reason or another, familial or social or whatever. And this has to be resisted. That the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights says that the only bar, only limit on freedom of speech, for instance, of expression, should be if it's a threat of violence to an individual or a community. That's fair enough, but I wouldn't want to go much further than that. Some people, even here, were arguing for legislation against hate speech, for instance. I mean, well, what is hate speech, you know? How far do you go? So I would resist this. A number of countries, members of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, were proposing international resolutions and then national legislation on what they call defamation of religion. Well, this has to be resisted. I mean, of course, we must protect religious believers. But if we start protecting religious belief, then there can be no critique, there can be no really objective study of religion, any religion. And I say to Christians, as I say to others, well, if somebody attacks your religion, give them an answer. Don't try and shut them up. That's the first thing. The second is my concern that we should at least note positives. There's a tendency for us to look at all the problems that there are, and there are many such, as we have heard. But there have been some positives. If you look at Egypt, what Egypt could have become under the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'm not saying that Sisi is perfect by any means. The Middle East is full of people who are not perfect and even might be described as monsters, but you have to choose your monster. And certainly Sisi, in terms of freedom of religion and of belief, has achieved something. A sort of incipient Bill of Rights in the new Egyptian constitution bears study. And I would commend a Bill of Rights approach if we are going to go down the way of encouraging legislation. Because democracy is never enough anywhere, including here, because it can simply become the tyranny of the majority. And bills of rights in the US and here both protect minorities in the way that Ambassador Brownback was saying we should be doing, and other speakers as well. There has been progress in what you might call meliorism, making things better without changing the system. So I would like the blasphemy law in Pakistan to be repealed. There's no question about that. But in the meantime, what do you do? And there are administrative and judicial measures that can be taken that have been commended to the government of Pakistan to prevent another Asia Bibi. You see, it is possible to do this, and it is possible for the United States and Britain to promote this. The question of dialogue, interfaith dialogue, I went to the session on interfaith dialogue, but it really wasn't about that because, I don't believe in kisi-kisi dialogue, whether interfaith or ecumenical for that matter, where we pat each other on the back and say how wonderful we are. But real questions, with Al-Azhar al-Sharif, the premier place of Sunni learning in the world, the question is, how is Sharia to be understood in the Islamic world today? No legislation worth anything will come about unless there is some progress in that area. I think we have to be frank. With the holy city of Qom, there may be people in Iran who deserve to be sanctioned, but there are equally many ulama, Shia ulama, who are very open to discussing how a Shia understanding of Sharia can influence Iran in the future, and we have to identify them and talk to them. And not enough of that is being done. The underlying issues are that of conscience, respect for conscience, and this is a common problem not just in the world out there, but in our own countries. The erosion of respect for conscience where that has existed before, and in some places, of course, it's never existed. But we need to talk a lot more about that. In British legislation, Britain has been noted for respecting conscience even in times of war. But recent legislation has neglected this, and you have to ask why this is the case. Reasonable accommodations for people to manifest their faith openly, individually or together. Again, this has to be reinforced again and again, the practice of the cult, of how people actually express their faith, not just something that they may believe in their hearts or their heads. Coming to policy making, on the diplomatic front, I know the United States is different, but what I have found with British diplomats is the resistance to the idea that they should be taught religious literacy. They think of it as being sent to Sunday school. I mean, that's how it is. And they will not buy it. Whatever you do, whatever programs you construct, it's not going to work. So what do you do? I think, again, Tom has been saying this, but you have to show them that they cannot understand economic systems without reference to religion in many parts of the world. So interest-free economies, for instance, Sharia-based economies are proliferating in the Islamic world. Well, how are you going to engage with that if you don't know anything about Islam? Political systems are being constructed in the name of ideology, whether Sinicization or whether Islamic ideology. Again, you have to understand what's behind them. And so with social customs, I mean, I have seen a country like Indonesia go from a very relaxed kind of observance of Islam to a more and more strict observance. Now, what is causing this? It's not just happening of its own volition. So I think encouraging them to do this, to understand these phenomena in terms of religious belief would give it some currency, I think. This business about faith-blind approaches, so-called faith-blind approaches to relief, to development, to refugees, and so on, doesn't work because so many of the problems in relief and development are caused by people belonging to a particular faith, whether that is Yazidis or Christians or Ahmadiyya or whoever it may be. The British government has a large-scale educational program in Pakistan. And again, they have been asked, how does this affect women, and particularly women who are not Muslims? And the answer is, we take a faith-blind approach. Well, the effect of a faith-blind approach would be to exclude the marginalized, to marginalize them even more. I mean, that's the bottom line. So that doesn't work. And we need the integration of freedom of religion and belief, I want to say, rather than all belief. With aid, you talk, sir, about $8. I mean, that's certainly, the European Union has the MSF scheme, the GSF scheme, and where it aligns human rights issues with trade policy. You talked about trade dollars. But Pakistan was the one country that was exempted from such scrutiny and given GSP2 status. Why? Why was it exempted? I mean, are there favorites? And why are there favorites? So aid and trade, certainly I would support that. On the question of provision here in Britain for freedom of religion and belief, of course, it's wonderful that Jeremy Hunt commissioned the Truro report and the way in which it was researched and written, and it's a great resource for us, and I'm glad it's been reviewed. But we don't have anything as yet like the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. And I think that the work of the envoy would be significantly strengthened. I'm just coming to an end. Significantly strengthened if we did have a commission like that. And just to be provocative, I think, I don't know if Ray agrees with this, but I think it is a mistake to locate the office of the envoy in the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office. They are the Prime Minister's envoys, not the foreign secretaries, and they should be either in Downing Street or at least the Cabinet Office, because they need a certain amount of independence vis-a-vis the Foreign Office if they are going to be effective and to resist the resistance, if you like. Then finally, there is a relationship between what is happening domestically and what happens internationally. So here in this conference, there was somebody who is a candidate of a political party in Britain for parliament who was telling me that because he's an Orthodox Christian, his candidacy is in jeopardy. You see, I mean, David knows who it is, obviously. People cannot hold public office if they are believing Christians or maybe of other faiths. Midwives have been told, in terms of conscience, the recognition of conscience in the Abortion Act, that they can not take part in the procedure, but they still have to prepare the patient. So, you know, are Christians going to be excluded from gynecology in the future? Well, some already are. There are all sorts of examples of this, and I think Lord Alton's point that it begins with discrimination and exclusion. We shouldn't ignore that, and that will enable us to see the whole global thing more clearly if we also see it on our doorstep. So thank you very much indeed for this opportunity, and I'm very glad to be here and to hear all the wisdom.
So what we're going to do is we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers, and then we're going to go to we're going to dismiss, in a sense, and have a little bit more of refreshments and a casual ending where you can catch the speakers. But here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to look to the students first if they have a question. I'm going to let several people field their question from the floor, and then we're just going to go down the row and answer them however they want, okay? Does anyone have a question? Would you raise your hand? Super. And so I'm going to call on several of you. Briefly state your question, and we'll go to the next one. Matt?
Oh, thank you. With the situation of the Uyghurs in China, you've seen a lack of reaction, a lack of care, I'd argue, from a lot of Islamic countries and countries in Central Asia, which have a lot of similarities, and you'd assume a lot of solidarity. And where the US and the UK, especially the US, has really led that cause. How do you think that countries like the US and UK can help countries that are economically tied to China really stand up for freedom of religion and belief?
Other questions we're going to put on the queue here. This gentleman right here, one of our students.
I just wondered, like, your initial steps in attempting to tackle various blasphemy laws. You mentioned in Pakistan and Indonesia. Like, I've done a bit of my own research on that myself, and like, I agree they're very problematic. But I mean, I for one can't think of like the first few steps that we need to take to deal with it. And I was just wondering your initial thoughts.
And just hand it right here to Cole. And we'll just push it this way.
So my question is, I'm sensing in a way that I had never sensed earlier in my life that religious freedom is under attack. It's suspected and so forth. Are there ways that the common partnership can learn from each other and can respond to that issue?
Super, and I think we have time for one more. This, if we can do it, I'm going to ask this gentleman and then the young lady next to you. Okay, those will be the last two. Go ahead.
Yeah,
no offense to the other hands.
My question is about the universality of concepts of human rights, religious freedom, parliamentary democracy, and whether they are applicable in other societies, like the Middle East, for example, because these concepts developed in the West and are heavily influenced by Western schools of thought.
Super. And would you hand it to this young lady?
Thank you so much for your comments. We just heard that the suggestion of the special envoy role being moved from the Foreign Office to number 10 or to Cabinet Office. How would that measure up with the envoy's role having the mandate for international religious freedom? Do you think the mandate should actually change to international and domestic religious freedom, or do you think it can still be kept within number 10 in Cabinet but maintain the same mandate?
Right. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to hand the mic to Lord Alton, and these individuals, ending with Ray Chishti, can say whatever they want, briefly, in response to the questions we just had. Let me make one other note, and that is that the remarks of the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, Rashad Hussain, were off the record. Those remarks were off the record. They won't be part of the video after this event, and I just ask for you to treat them that way. So,
except for his praising of RFI.
Except for his praising of RFI, that's correct.
So briefly, that reminds me of a meeting I spoke at once in Manchester. It's one of Liverpool's better class suburbs, you may have heard of it. And the guy introduced me and he said, David's not going to make a long speech or a short speech, it will be a mediocre speech. And I went on to fulfill his expectations until afterwards he ended up by saying that was a Rolls-Royce of a speech. And I realized that Rolls-Royce is usually very smooth and always goes on forever. So I will try and avoid the temptation of answering all the questions that have just been asked. But let me take the Yazidi question. I'm vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the Yazidis. And as I have been sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party for speaking out about the Yazidis and the destruction of the freedom of Hong Kong, the threats to Taiwan, and the...
You mean the Uyghurs?
What did I say? It's been a long day. Thank you. Yeah. I literally came from events on the Yazidis and the Hazaras. Sorry. But the terrible things that the CCP have done to the Uyghurs, what more than 1 million people incarcerated in Xinjiang, people have been enslaved. The former Foreign Secretary said that this is on an industrial scale, and the present Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, has said that this is a genocide. Now, here is where we don't sing from the same hymn sheet and should do, because Secretary of State Blinken, but also Secretary of State Pompeo, both said this is a genocide. And this is an issue I raised through legislative attempts on the trade bill. Someone referred earlier on to the link between trade and freedom of religion and belief. And I moved amendments. We got a majority of over 100 in the House of Lords. It came within a whisker of going through in the House of Commons. Many senior Conservatives supported it, including Ian Duncan Smith, the former leader of the Conservative Party. It didn't go through in the end, but it certainly raised the issue vociferously, and it hasn't gone away. How do we determine what is a genocide? When you get the head of the Foreign Office coming before our Select Committee in the Lords recently and saying that it's a matter for the courts to determine, knowing that no court is empowered to do it in the UK, and it won't go to the International Criminal Court because China would veto it in the Security Council, they know that's a dead end. And then when you say to him, as I did, so who makes the policy? You or the Foreign Secretary? Because she says it is a genocide. The House of Commons has voted to say it is a genocide, and still you will not act upon it. And it makes a mockery of the whole thing. Furthermore, the US and the UK should stand together on such matters. For instance, Hikvision, which is a surveillance company that manufactures the cameras that are used in Xinjiang to intrude into people's family lives, to monitor them, to create the surveillance state. They have 1 million cameras in the United Kingdom. We haven't banned them. The US has banned them. Why? We didn't ban Huawei until it was almost too late, and it cost British taxpayers millions of pounds to have to disengage from that. If we'd acted together with Five Eyes allies with Australia and with the US, we wouldn't have got into that position in the first place. I'll take one other question, which was the question of blasphemy laws. I chaired the meeting yesterday, which was a Jubilee campaign meeting, which we held in the IPU room in Parliament on the blasphemy laws. And I put up my remarks on my website last night, so if you're interested, you can have a look at them. I went to Pakistan in 2019. I took up the case, as Michael knows, of Asia Bibi. I got access to the Supreme Court judges. They were incredible. They were brave. They were willing to face down the lynch mobs that were saying that they wanted her life. She'd been sentenced to death. They overturned that ruling, and she was ultimately allowed to leave. But that legislation, the blasphemy laws, they're used against Muslims, they're used against Christians, they're used against Ahmadis, they're used against anybody for vexatious reasons. So I call for the reform of the laws, certainly as the first step. And there are some things you can do, which is that the local policeman should not be able to bring those charges. It should have to go up to a very high level before such charges are brought. No local judge should hear such cases. And also that those who bring such cases, if they're found to be wrong and vexatious and just slanderous, then the person who brought the case should then be able to be brought to court and face a prison sentence. And that way, you would disincentivize such cases in the first place. And it would be a step forward from where we are now, and hopefully one day we would then finally see the repeal.
May I just add to that? I mean, I think that sorry, I beg your pardon, just about the blasphemy law. The government has been presented with detailed plans with exactly how to do this, where the reporting should be done, what should then happen to the initial reporting, who should decide to prosecute, and so on. But they have not done anything about it. I mean, these are practicable steps that could easily be taken. Just two things about punishment for those who make false accusations. The danger is some people, even Christians, are arguing that they should then get the same punishment as those accused falsely. But I think there's a danger in that. If you drive them into a corner and they know they're going to face the same punishment, they will not then withdraw their accusation, which does sometimes happen, and I think we should encourage them to do so. The Supreme Court judgment on Asia Bibi is a curate's egg. It's good in parts. It's good in saying that there was false testimony against her, which was the basis for the acquittal, but it does not challenge the validity of the blasphemy law, which can actually in the future be used against people.
I was just going to throw out, I don't think the U.S. anyway, and probably the U.K., using all the tools they have in their tool chest. You know, the U.S. government, has given waivers to 4 countries that have been designated as countries of particular concern because they're friends. And yet, Pakistan could easily have some sort of, do these changes and then we'll give you the waiver. I mean, there's all sorts of things they could do. I mean, they could also do a binding agreement that's part of the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. Don't do it. So you see all these tools on the table that aren't being used that I think we need to use. And I think for blasphemy laws, I think it's low fruit. We need to look for those. They're actually, I was just talking to the USERF staff today, and there's been several countries in the last year that have eliminated them, but they're ones that haven't been implemented for a while or haven't been enforced for a while, but still that's a win. So, even we just have to keep, like I said, just going for the low fruit when we can get it, and have some rewards for these guys. I just real quick want to address, even though I'm from the U.S., combining domestic and international religious freedom, because I get that a lot in the U.S. too. And the thing about it is USERF is the perfect example where we have Tony Perkins from the FRC on one end and somebody that was appointed by George Soros fellow, and they're like best friends, seriously. And do trips together and care about the same things, and there is no daylight between them on religious freedom. The minute you introduce domestic freedom, you all of a sudden don't have that bipartisanship. Number one. Number two, the minute one party has a big enough advantage and they use that office as a tool against the other side, when the other side gets power, they'll eliminate it. So, we've talked to a couple countries that combine the two advocacy at USERF to say, think about separating them, so that your international stuff can stay kind of pure.
I'd want to second that. I want to pick up both of your questions from over there. I think that's very wise. I absolutely hear what Michael says, and it's a salutary reminder that in this country we have respected conscience. And in times of war, we've allowed conscientious objection. And there is undoubtedly a liberal tyranny that does not allow conscientious objection. And that is in itself, I want to say, objectionable. But I also want to say, I do stick to the line that I came out with earlier today, that I do think the best way to sensitize people domestically to that kind of intolerance is to advocate internationally for freedom of religion and belief, international religious freedom, and freedom genuinely for all. And my hope, and maybe I'm naive in this, but my hope is that will play back then into the domestic situation. I may be naive, I'm willing to shot down on that, but I think that's what I think is the best tactic to address it. But I do accept that there are major inconsistencies in that. The other thing I want to pick up, your point, Sarah, about is the concept of human rights a Western construct? I want to say yes, it is. And I want to say, off the record in this meeting, the concept of human rights owes far more to the Enlightenment than it does to the Christian tradition. You know, the Christians should be focused on responsibilities, not on rights. But I also want to say we are where we are, and I think it's a given, and it is the tool that we have, and I think it's the tool that we need to use. But I want to say to you, I'm not without my own reservations about the concepts of human rights. But we are, and I also recognize that people from the States, you know, I think that concept of rights, you know, it's hardwired in the Declaration of Independence. But I want to say I do have some reservations, not because I'm anti the Declaration of Independence, of course. You know, but because of my theology, essentially.
Very quickly, if I might say to the bishop, if you think the Enlightenment is responsible for religious freedom, read a book.
I didn't say that, Tom. I didn't say that.
You didn't. But I'll give you an opportunity.
Thanks.
Well, I'll tell you what.
No. What I said was the Enlightenment. I think the Enlightenment the Enlightenment is responsible for the concept of human rights. Absolutely not. The Enlightenment is responsible
Fair enough.
for the
Fair
concept
enough. That's an
of
important
religious
correction. I still would suggest that you read a book by an Oxford Don, who is an atheist. His name is Larry Siedentop, called Inventing the Individual, in which this atheist Oxford Don says that we have democracy because of Christianity, because of the Judeo-Christian, including the notion of human rights. So it's a combination of the two. That's not a condemnation of the Enlightenment, except the French part of it. I have to get a little bit of that in.
I think that's right. Sorry if I may.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. Siedentop's book is very important. So is Tom Holland's Dominion. But I would also say that the Dominican tradition, going back to St. Thomas Aquinas, and then in the lectures at Salamanca by Vittoria, then implemented by Bishop Bartolome Las Casas in Mexico, with regard to the rights of what he calls the Indians. Well, as you know, they weren't Indian, they were Americans. That is what created the whole discourse of what came to be called natural rights or human rights in Europe. And it is quite clear that the moderate Enlightenment people like John Locke are indebted to that Dominican tradition. So it certainly is a Christian tradition. I think on the wider questions are of the West is itself a construct. And we cannot be anachronistic. So, I mean, the ancient world spread over Europe, Asia, and Africa, and had a certain unity which was provided by the Roman Empire and other factors. But we must appeal to the best in people's religion and culture. I mean, the Constitution of Medina was mentioned. Why can we not appeal to that? I was talking to some Iranian ulama once in Tehran, and it happened that the cylinder of Cyrus, which prescribes, the liberty for the captives in the Babylonian Empire, was on loan from the British Museum to the National Museum in Tehran. So I thought I'd begin by saying what a wonderful testimony to Iranian respect for human freedoms. And the man presiding on the other side said, well, we are not interested in the past, we are only interested in the future. But the tradition is there.
Michael, I'd just add a word on that as well, because first of all, I think if you just go back to the book of Genesis and look at the statements about every human being being made in the likeness and image of God, I think that's a pretty good starting point for how you then deal with rights and responsibilities and duties. And to that extent, I agree with what Philip is saying, but there is a balance between rights and responsibilities and duties, and we must emphasize both. But the upholding of the rights of the human being goes also alongside human dignity. And I think we've got to say much more about that. The Enlightenment also did do some pretty bad things as well as good things. And you look at the secular ideologies that it spawned, and think about the mass murderers of the 20th century. And you think of Stalin and Mao and Hitler and the rest. These are all secular ideologies. So I think let's have a balanced discussion about it, but not discard all of our past too. And I'll just end on the issue of conscience. I left a political party because something that was always a conscience issue was suddenly made a party policy. And I said, I passionately believe in the right to life. And I'm not going to go out and say that, the opposite of what I believe. And the no platforming of people, the cancelling of people, the intolerance, and now on gender issues, everyone from J.K. Rowling to Professor Kathleen Stock, I find it slightly ironic that I'm going into bat for free speech for one or two of the people I've just mentioned and others, but good, because we're on the same side of an argument. We want to allow intellectual curiosity. We want to allow people to express a different point of view, and we shouldn't coerce. But I agree that this should not be something that is attached directly to freedom of religion or belief in the international sphere. Religious freedom in the international sphere is about people being persecuted. It's about genocide. It's about wicked and terrible things that are happening. The things that happen to us in our democracies, we may complain about, and they may be uncomfortable, but in the end, they are of a wholly different order. So let's keep our priorities and not allow, as we've just been very wisely told, these things to become part and parcel of the same operation, because if you do, then I'm afraid that you will lose the cross-party coalitions and the people that I'm willing to stand alongside to speak out on their behalf too, even though we wouldn't share the same religious beliefs.
And last, Ray.
Yeah, just picking up on the point which was raised earlier about the role of the Special Envoy for freedom of religion or belief. Having done the role for a year, what I would say with regards to that specific question, should it stay in the Foreign Office, should it go to the Cabinet Office, should it go to the Prime Minister's Office, is the question is when I looked at those 22 different recommendations by Bishop Philip, I think he'll remember the first call I had was with him to say, what is your reasoning behind these recommendations? And the role of the Special Envoy was modeled on the United States Ambassador at Large for freedom of religion or belief. And that is based in the State Department. And therefore, if this role is specifically designed to advance international religious freedom, then it needs to stay at the Foreign Office, my view. Because you need to have diptychs of different countries around the world. You need to be able to read them so that you can work with international partners around the world. But I do think the role, the way it's structured, having done it for a year, needs to improve. So what I would say needs to be done, the role in the United Kingdom with a Special Envoy should be fully resourced to the level that we have the role in the United States with Ambassador Sam Brownback. The way he did it and Knox, the way the team had the structure, the resource, is the right way. What I also said to the Prime Minister, having dealt with that role for a year, believe me, 5 hours of sleep, trying to do that role with the resource that you have, to deliver Bishop Philip's recommendations, is to say, the envoy should have the authority to go to the floor of the House and respond to MPs' questions. So, and I said this to the Prime Minister's office, is to then say, when you then have a statement on, urgent question on Nigeria, urgent question on a debate on religious freedom, and there are many across parliamentarians, you need to have on the floor of the House the authority for the envoy to be able to then respond rather than pass the file to a duty minister. The duty minister will cover the point, but he's not or she's not the expert in that area. So the role needs to be structured with fully resourced, with the authority. And what I was grateful for, having before taken up the role, I made it clear to the Prime Minister I wanted the authority to sit in on the ministerial meetings with the Foreign Secretary, the Minister for the Middle East, Minister for Asia, Minister for Europe, so that the envoy who covers 190 countries is present when those regional issues are discussed. That should not be down to the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister to discuss with the envoy. It should be the standard with regards to those structural changes. Fiona Bruce is a brilliant envoy. But what I would say to ensure that she can fully maximize what she can do is to restructure the role with the authority, the resource, to be able to deliver what we need to deliver across the board. But I do think it should, in my view, having dealt with it for a year, stay in the Foreign Office because of the international angle, separate it from a domestic minister for faith, which we have at the Department of Communities and Local Government. I hope this answers your point.
Well, this event tonight was about the special relationship, which is not a closed club. A special relationship is really about partnership in working. And what you've heard tonight is about civil society, universities, think tanks, government officials, doing the hard work of picking up the burden, representing the lost, representing the persecuted, and doing the hard work. Churchill said this isn't just a special relationship between the United States and the UK. It is an essential relationship for us and for the world. I think we've heard that tonight. So thank you all. Would you help me in ending us by thanking our panelists?